Hello. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. So we are welcoming you to this online press conference ahead of the second United Nations Habitat Assembly. And we are greeting you from Nairobi in Kenya. My name is Katerina Bezgachina, and I'm heading communications for UN Habitat in Nairobi. I'm going to be the moderator for this online press conference. And shortly, I will introduce the guests that we have, and we'll share with you the agenda that we have for the press conference. I just want to let you know that this is our last press briefing before the assembly starts. The second United Nations Habitat Assembly opens on Monday, on the 5th of June, here in Nairobi, and it will run until June. All next week, we are going to be having this assembly here. It is one of the first biggest international gatherings here in Kenya, in Nairobi, after the COVID pandemic. So we are really happy to have it here and to be able to organize it. We had a number of briefings in the news to the editors of Kenya, with the executive director of UN Habitat, Madam Maimuna Mout Sharif. She presented it to the news in Kenya. She presented it on the couple of news programs. This is our opportunity, and we would like to share this news with a wider audience. We are opening it up, and we are really happy that the virtual technology is allowing us to reach more people and inform you more about the event that is happening in Nairobi. This is our first experience organizing online press conference. We hope everything will go fine technically. And I would like to thank the African Press Organization for facilitating this and helping us organize it. So I welcome everyone. And just before we start, I would like to give you a few housekeeping rules. We will have some statements and we will update you about the assembly, and then we'll have time for question and answers. So if you can kindly wait with your questions until the end, and then we will set aside time where we can interact and answer your questions. Now we will really start with the program of the press conference. We are just 3 days before the start of the assembly, and we are in the final stages of the preparations. I know we had a slightly different program that was advertised, and unfortunately we had some last minute changes where some of the members who were planning to join us had to go to meet with the President of Kenya, who is also very much supportive of the assembly that is happening. So that's why we have here, but we still have our Deputy Executive Director, Dr. Michal Mlinar, who will be joining and updating you about the press conference. So I will introduce him in due course, but now just before we give the floor to Mr. Mlinar, I would like to thank the government of Kenya. And as I said, we have collaborated quite a lot with the government, with the county government here in Nairobi, who have supported the assembly. And she was not able to join us, but we have a short video that was recorded by the permanent representative of UN Habitat of Kenya to UN Habitat, Ambassador Jean Kimani. She is a very experienced career diplomat with 35 years of experience in diplomatic service, where she served in different locations. She was also Kenya's High Commissioner to Botswana, and she held a number of very important posts, but recently she has been the permanent representative of Kenya to UN Habitat, and she has played a prominent role in representing Kenya at UN Habitat Executive Board, and she has also championed revitalizing UN Habitat and its resource mobilization strategies. So we are really thankful to Ambassador Kimani for all her support, and she was able to record a short video for us with a message from the Kenyan government that she delivers. So I would like please to ask APO to play the video. Thank you.
Good afternoon, karibuni. And this is indeed a good opportunity to welcome all of us to the second session of the UN Habitat Assembly. We are excited about having the United Nations Habitat Assembly in Nairobi from next week. We look to the United Nations Habitat Assembly to make important decisions on sustainable urbanization and human settlements, and also to strengthen this important organization that is headquartered in Nairobi. As for Kenya, we are looking forward to welcoming all the delegates. We have laid out a red carpet in so many ways. The logistics are ready. We have also, outside the conference center, we have also organized, places that delegates can be able to view during that time. And we look forward to you, the delegates, enjoying a bit of Kenya. Secondly, we look forward to the extremely dynamic dialogues that will be held. One, I realized that on the first day, we'll have His Excellency the President opening this important meeting, and that really is our way of showing how important this particular meeting is to Kenya. We look forward to welcoming you all, and if you have any questions, please feel free to ask us. Our offices are open. We'll all be working during this session to make this assembly a success. I thank you.
Thank you very much, APO, for playing the video. So that was a message that Ambassador Kimani wanted to pass. She was planning to participate in this press event, but she was not able, so she was able to send us this message. But now I really would like to pass the floor and give the floor to our Deputy Executive Director, Dr. Michal Mlinar. He joined UN Habitat just recently at the beginning of April and started working on the preparations for the assembly right from his very start. Before that, he was Slovakia's ambassador and permanent representative to United Nations in New York, but he is also not new to UN Habitat because previously he was also ambassador of Slovakia to Kenya, and he actively participated and supported the work of UN Habitat here in Kenya. He was also the representatives, he served as the chair of the Committee of Permanent Representatives to UN Habitat and the president of the Governing Council of UN Habitat previously. So he's very familiar with the work of UN Habitat. So I would like to pass the floor to Dr. Mlinar and ask him to share a little bit about UN Habitat, also the United Nations Habitat Assembly, to explain what it is and its significance, and also what we expect as the outcome of this assembly that is going to open here in Nairobi on Monday. Dr. Mlinar, please, the floor is yours, so you can take the floor and make your statement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katerina, and thank you very much for our partners from the Africa Press Organization for helping us organize this online press conference. Indeed, there is always the first. So this is the first online press conference that we are doing. I'm sure not the last. Thanks very much for finding the time and joining us. Just literally hours before our second UN Habitat Assembly kicks off here in the beautiful country of Kenya and in Nairobi at the United Nations office here. Thank you also to Kenya, Asanteni Sana, for this wonderful hospitality and all the support that we are receiving. And indeed, this support from Kenya is also demonstrated as we speak by the fact that our executive director, Madam Maimouna Mokhtarif, was invited to brief His Excellency, the President of the Republic of Kenya, William Ruto on the final stage of the preparation. So I'm also bringing warm greetings and regards from her to you all. And I will be more than happy to give you the basic details and information, and of course later also answer any questions that you may have with regard to our assembly. So let me just say that UN Habitat actually is the United Nations Human Settlements Program. It is the UN entity for cities and human settlements, both urban and rural areas, obviously. The UN General Assembly mandated UN Habitat to promote socially and environmentally sustainable towns and cities, to provide adequate shelter for all. Our vision is a better quality of life for all in an urbanizing world, in a nutshell. UN Habitat is one of the UN agencies headquartered in Nairobi, Kenya. You know that two important UN agencies have their headquarters, global headquarters, in Nairobi, Kenya. It is our sister agency, the United Nations Environment Programme, UNEP, and also UN Habitat. This year, in fact, we celebrate 45 years of our presence in Kenya. We were set up by the UN General Assembly resolution back in 1978, following the Habitat 1 conference in Vancouver, Canada, which took place in 1976. At that time, world leaders were concerned by the state of the world and human settlements and wanted to improve the quality of life for people. So this was the original idea that actually brought us to be one of the important UN agencies. More than 39 million people have benefited from improved water services through our global programs. In addition, almost 5 million people were supported through our participatory slum upgrading program, which is particularly relevant for some parts of Africa. More than 2 million people benefited from sustainable urban reconstruction work in post-crisis countries like Iraq or Afghanistan. And of course, we work very hard also in other crisis situations, including the Sahel. And we have responded recently very quickly also to the recent natural disasters, such as the earthquake that hit Syria and Turkey, among others. It is important to stress that our mandate allows us to focus not only on cities and urban areas, but on all human settlements. This means smaller towns and rural places, and also what we call the urban-rural continuum. This is why we refer to human settlements in a wider context in our mandate. And now directly to the Assembly. The Assembly is the highest legislative body on urban issues and human settlements without doubt, and it is actually something that really is unique in the whole UN system. It is composed of all 193 UN member states that hold the voting rights in the UN. Other participants and observers include other UN bodies, specialized agencies, intergovernmental organizations, but also civil society, the private sector, academia, and research institutions, women, youth, children, grassroots organizations. Very importantly, Habitat works very closely with local and regional authorities, or in some cases, we call them local and regional governments. And they will also be holding some events in the margins of our Habitat Assembly. So the interaction and I would say cross-pollination between the governments and the local and regional authorities will be happening during the entire time of our assembly. It has in some way similar status to other UN assemblies or UN agencies. You may be familiar that UNEP, our sister agency, also has United Nations Environmental Assembly, and WHO in Geneva has its United Nations Health Assembly. So this is a similar context. The Assembly builds on sustainable urban development and implementation of the new urban agenda raised by the UN General Assembly, also during the high-level meeting last April in New York. And Katerina has mentioned that after almost 6 years of having served as Slovakia's ambassador to the United Nations in New York, I have been privileged enough and proud and humbled to be back in Kenya, but this time as member of the UN Habitat team. And I have served in the capacity of the Deputy Executive Director of UN Habitat since the 10th of April. Actually, last April in New York, more than 80 member states supported UN Habitat's mandate and advised to focus on 5 areas of sustainable urban development, namely affordable housing, urban climate action, urban crisis recovery, localization of SDGs, and finance. So these are, so to say, the main streams of our focus on and of our work. Well, the Habitat Assembly takes place only once every 4 years. This will be the second assembly. The first one took place back in 2019. It was still before COVID. So indeed, this is very crucial also because it will give us an opportunity for the first time also to reflect on the experience and the lessons learned that we have learned in the habitat context and in the context of human settlements from the COVID-19 pandemic. That's certainly not an unimportant context that we are also having in our mind. We actually expect around 5,000 participants that have already registered, and we will still have on-site registration ongoing actually as of now until Monday, and even during the assembly. And we have many high-level delegations. In fact, we expect about 56 ministers from all different parts of the world and about 27 vice ministers of urban development, housing, development cooperation, urban development, regional cooperation, foreign affairs, or different contexts that, of course, different countries have. We are very proud that His Excellency William Ruto, the President of the Republic of Kenya, will officially open the assembly, and that he also has invited other heads of state to participate. And I can also add that he will be joined also by His Excellency the President of Botswana, and we will also be able to welcome some First Ladies, including the First Lady of the Republic of Kenya, Her Excellency Mama Rachel Ruto, as well as the First Lady of Botswana, just to mention these highest level dignitaries. In addition to the assembly itself, we will be holding around 40 side events that will be focused on the main topics of the assembly. Also, there will be a special presidential dialogue, which the presidents will participate in, as well as a special first ever First Ladies dialogue that will be hosted by Madame Ruto. And it will actually take place on Tuesday morning, the second day of our assembly. Also, we will be hosting an urban expo in the margins of the assembly with about 56 exhibitors from all around the world displaying urban solutions and innovations in particular. which always is an important component of our assembly, because as I have mentioned, we are also bringing academia, business sector, innovators, and other important stakeholders. The theme of the second assembly is Sustainable Urban Future through inclusive and effective multilateralism, achieving the Sustainable Development Goals in times of global crises. This is the overarching topic, which of course then covers several different areas. I have already mentioned some of them, but let me mention again that, of course, it is universal access to adequate housing, urban climate action and environment protection. Thirdly, urban crisis recovery. Fourthly, localization of the SDGs and multi-level governance. And last but not least, prosperity and finance. Effective multilateral action is absolutely crucial, because this is obviously the bread and butter of all United Nations engagement in different contexts, including in the context of human settlements. We need to work together. We need to work more closely together, also due to the fact that, of course, global crises force us to do it more efficiently and more actively. And we need to ensure that all different levels of governance in countries, but also on the regional and international level, work properly, whether it's federal governments, national governments, local authorities, regional authorities, but obviously also the entire UN system and other international organizations. It is also important to say that the outcomes of our assembly will be crucial for other important UN processes. It will start with what we call pre-SDG summit. It will take place in New York in July. It is called the High-Level Political Forum, which is responsible for implementation or oversight and I would say the reporting on implementation of all the SDGs, of all the 2030 agenda, including our own specialized SDG 11, which focuses on sustainable cities and communities. So we will certainly be contributing to the high-level political forum in New York in July, and then later also to the SDG summit, which will take place again in New York in September. And we know that also the President of the Republic of Kenya, His Excellency William Ruto, together with other presidents, prime ministers from all over the world, will be participating and will be bringing to the SDG summit some of the important messages from this upcoming UN Habitat Assembly. We also hope that the outcomes of the Assembly on multilateral cooperation will feed into the Summit of the Future, which will be held in New York in September of 2024. And in this particular context, it is several work streams that will be crucial for the Summit of the Future, starting obviously with youth and future generation, then with digitalization and the so-called Global Digital Compact, but very importantly, also with increased and enhanced cooperation with local and regional authorities, which actually fits extremely well into what we call more inclusive and more networked multilateralism. And of course, local and regional authorities, mayors, governors, they play an extremely important role in our global efforts. And again, the pandemic, I'm sure you will all agree with me, the pandemic has shown us very clearly the important role that local and regional authorities play, and we need to have them on board. We need to better engage with them and ensure that the solutions that we design are efficient and inclusive. That's absolutely crucial. And if you ask me why UN Habitat is involved in all this work, it is obviously because of our mandate, because of housing, sustainable cities and communities, and the other work streams that I have mentioned, but also because UN Habitat within the entire UN system is the focal point for the cooperation with local and regional authorities. So there is nobody else better placed in the entire UN system than UN Habitat to work on this particular aspect of what the UN Habitat Assembly will also be discussing. So, these are some of these important aspects that that I wanted to mention. I don't need to repeat that we are facing multiple crises that affect people directly, and of course, the places where they live, mainly cities, obviously, because data that UN Habitat works with shows that 1 billion people around the world already today live in informal settlements. We have the figure of about 1.6 billion of people that will live in inadequate houses or are homeless, and that's a very alarming figure. According to our World Cities Report of 2022, COVID-19 pandemic created a class of newly poor people of almost 163 million in 2021. And the number of people in informal settlements is actually projected to rise up to an alarming number of 3 billion by 2050, if we do not address these problems, the underlying issues with the current urbanization rate. So as you will surely agree with me, these are important tasks that require our renewed and refocused attention. Actually, about 60% of displacements happen in cities. That's another alarming trend. And of course, I would be able to continue by adding that about 70% of carbon emissions are generated in cities. So that, of course, strongly shows also the importance of climate action work that UN Habitat has also been involved with, together with other important actors. So, these are all important and crucial developments that need to be properly addressed. So it is urban development, sustainable human settlements, and housing that are absolutely central to sustainable development. Solving the housing issue can create the foundation for better growth, prosperity, and equitable, inclusive communities and cities. I have often actually mentioned that housing and in fact the entire SDG 11 on cities and communities is probably one of the most cross-cutting issues in the 2030 agenda, because when you are able to address these challenges in our cities, and in particular, obviously, the housing issue, you are already contributing in a major way to so many other aspects, and you are creating entry points, positive entry points. You are creating access to so many other areas, such as water, sanitation, but also health, education, digitalization, and many others. Without housing, without proper attention to these issues in our cities in particular, we are simply not able to move forward on so many other issues. And for that, obviously, we need to work better together. As I have mentioned, national governments, local and regional governments, but obviously also the civil society, grassroots organizations, women, youth, academia, and others. And UN Habitat also works very closely with the many professional organizations of urban planners, architects, of those who really know how proper planning and design needs to be done, and who can advise to governments and to other actors about how to do things in a efficient and proper manner. And of course, we have a lot of projects in different parts of Africa, including in Kenya itself, whether it is here in Nairobi, in Matare slum, for example, whether it is the Nairobi Rivers project, which is absolutely crucial, but also, for example, the Go Blue project, which involves six Kenyan counties on the coast, but also Taita Taveta, that work together with us and with other partners to address some of the important aspects that I have already mentioned. Well, let me conclude by saying or referring to some of the key deliverables that we expect from the Assembly. We expect the ministerial declaration to be adopted during the Assembly, which of course will summarize from a political point of view all the key aspects that deserve our attention in this context. And the ministerial declaration will then be sent to New York in particular before the high-level political forum in July, before the SDG summit in September, but as a major contribution of our work to the overall UN efforts that are ongoing. In addition to the ministerial declaration, we have really a good number of important resolutions on the substance. There is a total number of 10 of them. I can mention at least a few. A resolution on access to affordable housing has been championed by Kenya, but also co-sponsored by some other member states, including France and others. Other important resolutions actually include accelerating transformation of informal settlements and slums by 2030, which has been championed by South Africa. Localization of the Sustainable Development Goals sponsored by Brazil, Egypt, Malaysia, and Spain. Then another resolution on international guidelines on people-centered smart cities, sponsored by France, South Korea, and Germany. Resolution entitled Biodiverse and Resilient Cities, mainstreaming biodiversity and ecosystem services into urban and territorial planning, co-sponsored by Costa Rica, Colombia, Singapore, Ecuador, and Germany. Draft resolution on urban planning and sustainable infrastructure, sponsored by the group of African states, to mention some of the most important ones from the resolutions. Obviously, housing is particularly relevant for our host country, for Kenya. You know that it's been one of the top priorities of the administration of President Ruto. Estimated 250,000 houses are actually in demand in Kenya annually, but also in other parts of Africa. This is something extremely relevant and important. 16 million people lack adequate housing in Nigeria. The housing shortage in South Africa actually stands at about 3.7 million housing units. So I think these are extremely important pieces of information that I wanted to bring to your attention. But also in other global regions, this is extremely relevant. For example, in Bangladesh, in Asia, this is one of the top priorities of the Prime Minister. They have also extremely actively been promoting this topic because we must stop seeing housing as a commodity or only as a source of potential income for developers. We need to see it more as part of the basic services, and even more as a basic human right. because as we will sure agree, everybody needs a home, and so many things are starting in where we live and what kind of home we are able to provide to our families, and in particular to our children. So proper and adequate housing is absolutely crucial. And as I have mentioned, there are so many other socio-economic areas and issues connected to it that are extremely relevant. So we hope that these important resolutions will be adopted during the assembly, and in general that we will have an extremely relevant and successful assembly for UN Habitat as agency, but also for the implementation of the 2030 agenda, the new urban agenda. But what matters more is for the benefit of the people we serve, because I would end up my initial remarks by strengthening the 3 Ps that I also personally am absolutely committed to in this work that we do here. And the 3 Ps, of course, are people, participation, and partnerships that we need to ensure in our work. So this is an invitation also to you to join us during the assembly. And of course, if you have any additional questions or need clarification, I will be more than happy to answer to the extent possible, or in some cases, maybe, of course, if you require more technical data, we can always come back to you and provide you with some of those. Katerina, back to you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Executive Director, for this very comprehensive overview of what we are expecting next week. I think that, as we said, we have provided this briefing, we have provided this information on what are the objectives of this assembly, what it is an assembly about, and what are the further contributions from this assembly. Now, this is the time, we have reserved time for the reporters who are interested in covering this event, maybe outside of Nairobi, outside of Kenya. So this is a chance where we can interact and we can ask questions. So please ask your questions, use the Q&A feature that is mentioning your name and outlet as well, but also those people who want to ask questions. So I think there are some raised hands, and we can invite people to unmute and ask the question. So I'm told there is one question, so I would like to invite the person to ask the question. When you're asking the question, can you please introduce yourself and which outlet you are represented and which country? So yes, please. I think there is there was one person who was interested in asking the questions, so please go ahead.
Al-Haji, over to you. You're on. I've unmuted you.
Sandra, I think he's still muted. Sandra, I think Al-Haji Daniel, he's still muted, so I don't know whether you can unmute him from your end.
Yes, just asked him to unmute. Maybe as he does that, we can take any other raised hands. If you have a question, you can raise your hand and I will unmute you.
Also, maybe while we are struggling with the technical setup for the questions and answers, I would like to share that those of you who want to follow the coverage of the assembly and physically are not in Nairobi. We are going to have a lot of materials online on unhabitat.org/unha2. This is UNHA2. This is where you can find all the latest information about the Habitat Assembly, about the submitted resolutions, about the discussions and the outcomes of those resolutions. Also, some of the sessions of the Assembly will be streamed on UN.org. If you go to the media.un.org on UN Web TV, some of these opening sessions, especially with the participation of the presidents, the First Ladies dialogue, these are going to be streamed and can be followed online. Also, the recording of those sessions will be available in the UN archive. So are we able now to unmute?
We have one question from Zinua Katerina, which we've just shared with you.
Okay, just a second. Yes, so there is one question from the Xinhua News Agency. Are you optimistic, Dr. Mlinar, that the second Habitat Assembly will be a new milestone in urban renewal globally, and particularly in Africa? And what is required to attain that, so that it becomes a milestone? What would be the outcome?
Okay, thanks very much. I am happy to take the question. Indeed, yes, I am an eternal optimist to start with, but on top of that, we have been preparing extremely diligently and extremely well as UN Habitat, but also together with our member states in order to ensure that the Habitat Assembly is a success. In addition to that, the substantial preparations have been spanning over a long period of time. I have also mentioned the high-level meeting of the UN General Assembly in New York last April, which brought together more than 80 ministers and many other delegations. And of course, there was a good reason for us to organize it in the Global UN Political Center in New York in order to give the appropriate attention to our work also here on housing and sustainable urban development in Nairobi. So I believe that the stepping stones that we have created really are helping us to have a feasible environment and good constellation for us to have a successful assembly. Also, not only the presidential dialogue or the dialogue of first ladies that I have mentioned, but other high-level sessions and conversations, in addition to the ministerial declaration itself, are very much result-oriented. So it's not just talking and exchanging views or having kind of a meeting just for a meeting, but it's really with us focusing a lot of our efforts on action-oriented points, on equipping the governments as well as all the other stakeholders with practical solutions, with ideas that are implementable, that have either worked already in some context and can be easily adapted also for others, or are really designed to mobilize, galvanize support, including something which is extremely important, localization of SDGs, and ensuring the necessary financing, because obviously it would not be possible without those two important elements. Back to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this question, for answering this question, Deputy Executive Director. Actually, we have one more question from Youthpreneur Samchi Digital platform, and they are asking us exactly about the localization of SDGs. One of the highlights of UN Habitat is localization of SDGs, and in this case, education and training is one of the main influences to the masses all over the world, and especially digital communication and digital documentation. How Habitat has engaged with these mediums and how it is creating profile so that experts can reference these different materials, and how the people who have an interest in UN Habitat can be affiliated with UN Habitat, how they can access some of this information digitally.
Thanks very much also for that question. And you know, I am a former educator, I'm a former teacher. So of course, if you are talking to me, you will always get a passionate reaction to anything and everything that that is related to education and training. Of course, that's one aspect. But more importantly, as I have already mentioned, we do recognize the important role that education and training plays for the empowerment of our young people. And again, this is extremely relevant, especially for Africa, where the youth population has been growing, and where we really need to create additional opportunities and ensure that you know, they are properly equipped for the future. And this important work indeed starts on the local level, because if we don't create decent enough and inclusive enough opportunities, education opportunities, training opportunities, and engagement, you know, at an early age on the local level, it may be too late. So our localization focus is not just a theoretical concept, but it is really embedded in the everyday work that we do with the local and regional authorities and with other partners, to ensure that that we really bring these things down to the local level, and that we assist the associations of cities or the associations of mayors, governors, to access the additional tools, and also to be able to share, to access also additional financing that they may need. And at the same time, of course, we are literally pushing the national governments to prioritize these things and to ensure that they have created the necessary legislative conditions, but also that they have been able to provide funding for these priorities. And we have a myriad projects in the field focusing on the same. And indeed, actually, we are committed to doing more. We would like to regenerate or reinvigorate our youth program. We also have a youth advisory board at UN Habitat that plays an important role. So these are but some of the aspects and some of the tools that we have, and that, of course, that we want to use even more actively.
Thank you very much, Deputy Executive Director, for sharing this information. There is one more question from Pedro Alonso from the Spanish news agency EFE. I think that this is probably something that I would be able to respond, because he is asking whether we can confirm if there are any ministers or vice ministers expected at the assembly who come from Spain on Latin American countries. I have the latest list of the ministers and vice ministers that are in attendance. We don't have ministers from Spain, but we do have ministers and vice ministers from Latin American countries. For example, from Venezuela, we have from Mexico, from Nicaragua, also vice minister from Costa Rica. There is quite a big delegation from the Latin American countries and from the Caribbean. They are also going to have a number of events at the press center where they are launching publications and information that is relevant to the countries of the Latin America and the Caribbean. So I can share the exact list of Spanish-speaking ministers or vice ministers who are going to be in attendance at the assembly via an email. So that can come to our UN Habitat /media@un.org email, the request, and then we can share this information with the most updated numbers. We still have, as the Deputy Executive Director of UN Habitat, Michal Mlinar, mentioned, we have more than 4,700 delegates that are registered. There might be a few more expected, so we expect to have about 5,000 participants in general at the assembly. So I think those are the questions that we had so far, and just being mindful of time. I think we still have some raised hands, but we were not able to unmute people. So in case you still want to ask your question, it is possible to also send us to the email unhabitat/media@un.org, and we will be able to respond. And I just also want to again thank very much Deputy Executive Director of UN Habitat for taking this opportunity and spending time to brief the media. I think it is quite important for us to work with the media and to try to explain you the importance of sustainable urban development and the importance of the assembly that is taking place, to elevate its status and to really showcase that urban development is quite important, and it's the matter of the whole UN system. I also would like to thank again the government of Kenya and the county government in Nairobi for all their support and all that they have done to really help us pull this assembly together. They've been extremely cooperative, and we worked for several months with them on putting this agendas and putting things together. I also want to thank some of the other donors who have contributed to this assembly recently, and actually at this assembly, UN Habitat will be launching the Sustainable Human Settlements Foundation. This is a private arm foundation that would allow us to fundraise for some of the projects and the project work of UN Habitat. This is helping us develop really demonstration projects that can be scaled, replicated, and attract more donors and investors. And this foundation accepts private donation. And one of the first donors who came to that foundation is Athos. They're one of the first contributors, and it's a global financial group that creates positive impact through Sharia compliant ethical financial services. And we will share more about that work during the business assembly that is preceding the United Nations Habitat Assembly. There are a few roundtables and events that are taking place in Nairobi over the weekend, just to start the assembly, and then the assembly itself will start in the morning on Monday with the official opening ceremony, and we expect to have the President of Kenya, His Excellency William Ruto, and the First Lady of Kenya at the opening of that assembly. Again, I thank you everyone for joining the press conference, for all the questions and all the attention that you have given us. As I mentioned earlier, you can follow the coverage of the assembly online on our social media channels on our website. The website address is unhabitat.org/unha2. We also encourage you to share your thoughts and your ideas, your wishes for the Habitat Assembly. What are the issues that can be considered? What are the issues that should be brought to the attention? You can use hashtag unha2, UNH2, A2. This is where we are going to be having all the coverage of the assembly. And also the assembly is going to be streamed on UN Web TV at media.un.org. This is where some of the sessions could be live streamed, as well as sessions from the press center during the assembly. So for all the information, you can go there. And as I said, this is our last media briefing before the assembly starts on Monday. We hope to see many of you here on campus in Gigiri in UN. But those of you who are physically not in Kenya or in Nairobi, you can also follow us online through streaming. Once again, thank you very much. I also thank Africa Press Organization for facilitating, organizing, and logistically pulling everything together. And I thank Deputy Executive Director for his time and also his very extensive briefing on the importance of the assembly and what would be the resolutions that we can expect. Thank you very much. And we see you on Monday, on 5th of June in Nairobi. Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.